All units proceed to your post assignments. All units proceed to your post assignments.
Come on, man.
That's what I have to say to you, Elon Musk. Come on, man. Come on. I put my reputation on the line here. I have a big-time wager with my friend Scott. I've been in your corner. I've been saying that it's just a matter of time. We just need to get your attention. So now push has come to shove. I'm a dangerous man, and you don't want to mess with me. The gloves are off.
Uh-oh.
The gloves are off. I'm going to give you now an opportunity, Elon Musk, to prove that you really are sincere about free speech. And if you're not, well, guess what? I'm going to jump onto Scott's side and say, you're a fake. I still think it is a matter of getting your attention. Now, I don't know if you know this, Scott, but last night I tweeted a version of what we just saw in the opening. Did you happen to notice that, or did anybody tell you?
I'm not on Twitter, Jeff.
No, I know, but it was there was also some talk on Telegram about it.
I've been coughing my lungs out, so I haven't been on Telegram as much as I should be. So I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. By the way, you know the usual audio thing that I encourage you to do? Why don't you try to do that real quick? And while you're doing that, I'll explain that my Twitter account is @CitizenJeff. And so what we just saw in the opening is essentially my tweet. It's my pin tweet. And I'm going to ask, we have about 40 to 75,000 people who watch this podcast every episode. And I assume some of you have Twitter accounts. So those of you who want to help us make sure we get Elon Musk's attention, please retweet my pin tweet @CitizenJeff. And it's a version of what we just saw. What is going on here without Scott's camera? We have him off. Oh, there he is. Okay. Let's see how you
I forgot to hook up the really good camera, and we were on the computer camera. So I've put the really good camera on so that people can see my pimples.
That's all right. You're only about 62 years old. So what are you, 62 or 61?
Good Lord, Jeff, don't put me in the grave yet.
No, I'm gonna say, no, I feel the same way because like, why do I still have pimples? I thought this was supposed to go away.
Yeah, well, what's going on? This is like, I'm going back. It's like Benjamin Button, I'm going backwards.
I don't get it. All right, so everybody out there, let's get Elon Musk's attention. We'll find out once and for all whether or not he just hasn't noticed it yet or whether it's intentional, okay? Let's make it impossible for him to not notice it. Tweet @Elon Musk. Also tweet at anybody with a big account and tweet at the people who should be retweeting us, which are the hosts of other podcasts who always say they're big supporters of Scott. So how about it, Judge Knapp? You always say he's your best guest, your favorite guest, the most popular guest. Why don't you retweet it, Judge Knapp? How about Eva Bartlett, our pal Eva Bartlett, Richard Medhurst, any of the people, Aaron Mate, how do you say it? Mate. Aaron Mate. I'm not saying they won't do it, but so far I don't think they have. So tweet at these people. How about at the people who have been doing the Twitter files? Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss. Matt Taibbi should care about this. Tweet at Matt Taibbi too. Let's make it impossible for Elon Musk to ignore. And then he'll either do the right thing or he won't. And if he doesn't do the right thing, I'm jumping on Scott's team and I will denounce Elon Musk. So there. What do you think of them apples, Scott?
All I can say is, my God, if we had bet a bottle of whiskey, we'd be at war. I mean, this is a beer we're talking about. Jeff's going crazy.
Well, it's about that and it's about free speech both. So you put the two together.
I know, Jeff. I appreciate it.
And as a dangerous man, I look for fights. That's just the way I am. All right, let's go to.
I'm your friend, buddy. I'm your friend.
Don't worry about it.
Don't fight me.
No. And don't make a joke about it. I'm serious. I'll give you as an example. The other day, I was walking by. You've probably seen these signs. I saw a sign on a building. It said, "Don't even think about parking here." You've seen those signs, right? Have you ever seen them?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I did?
Parked.
No, I thought about it.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'm not crazy. I didn't actually park there, but in total defiance of the sign, I thought about it for a good minute and a half. There you go.
They're coming for you, Jeff. The thought police.
Alex from Moscow. After listening to your interview with Garland Nixon, I was a little confused by your position on Russian bloggers. Why are you sure they are absolutely wrong? Where do you get information about the structure and customs of the current army of the Russian Federation?
Well, I don't get it from former members of the DPR and LNR militias, with all due respect. They're not, only recently had they become part of the Russian army. Prior to that, to the entire 8 years that they fought from 2014 to 2022, they weren't part of the Russian army. So frankly speaking, somebody like Strelkov, and others who are going to sit there and blog about stuff they have no clue about, I dismiss it. And it's not just that. It's one thing, to give you an example, General Berger, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, just recently, Eva Bartlett's on it, Jeff. I just want to let you know. Eva's on it.
I didn't mean to suggest she wouldn't. I just said she could. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you, Eva. But General Berger has restructured the Marine Corps. He has radically redefined how the Marine Corps is organized, how it's equipped, how it operates, especially in the Pacific. And there are some people, myself included, who have doubts about this. And so, if I were to write something about it, I would say that I question the long-term viability of restructuring an entire 1/3 of the Marine Corps, actually 1/2 of the Marine Corps, for littoral warfare, because that's you're making huge investments into a problem set that isn't going to be lasting more than a decade. But that's a professional discussion that I can have with him because I was a Marine, because I understand these things. And I'm respectful of the Marine Corps, and I'm respectful of the Marine Corps' relationship with the government, et cetera. What I don't do is say, Berger's an idiot. Berger's and then I can come up with a whole string of words that these guys use. I mean, it's the most unprofessional thing in the world what these guys do. If they disagree with somebody, they use the C word, and they use this word, and they use that word. They insult, and there's nothing constructive about it. So first of all, when your opening is that stupid beep, 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 how am I supposed to treat the rest of what you're writing? Well, this guy's rational. This guy's on point. This guy's got something to say. Or you're really bitter about something. And what most of them are bitter about is the fact that once the militias of Donetsk and Lugansk were compelled by necessity to professionalize, they got rid of all the rank amateurs, all the wannabes, all the cowboys, all the guys that came in and set up their own private little armies, were running around as if they were Genghis Khan. And Strelkov, by the way, is one of those. And they fired them. They said, get the heck out of here. We don't want you anymore. We don't need you. You're counterproductive. And so all these people went off and they became these bloggers. They really don't care about the Russian army. They use their alleged expertise about the Russian military as a means to attack Vladimir Putin. Their big wet dream in life is that Vladimir Putin will be overthrown and replaced by somebody who thinks like they do. And again, you can just tell by the language they use. When there's somebody out there that, that they don't like, it's never, I disagree with this person because X, Y, and Z. It's, he's a fat meat, he's a beep, he's a beep, he's a beep. And they just swear. So with all due respect, These guys are about as unprofessional as it gets. Where do I get my information about the Russian military? From the Russian military. Imagine that. Somebody who actually reads things that the Russian military puts out there. Somebody who has studied the Russian military his entire adult life. I mean, starting from the thesis I wrote in college, my honors thesis, which was a history of the Russian military and how traditions from the Tsarist military transferred over to the Soviet military, throughout my professional career, preparing to fight the Soviets, to my continued, post-military career of just assessing, analyzing. I'm intimately familiar with the Russian military, with their leadership, with their doctrine, with their equipment. So I feel comfortable in saying, yeah, I know a hell of a lot more about the Russian military than these bloggers do, but I'm willing to engage in a discussion, debate, and dialogue because I acknowledge I don't know everything. And if they want to engage responsibly, I'll do that. But if their opening word is, Ritter, you big, fat, big-titted beep, we're done. And of course,
not to mention you have a blemish on your face too.
Do I have a blemish on my face too?
Well,
why would you point that out to the crowd? I put some makeup on it, and I said, "Oh man, thanks, Jeff." Because now they'll call me a pimple-faced, big-titted, fat old man.
Big-titted.
That's literally what he said. Of all the insults that are out there, that one hurt. That one made me go back to the gym.
You wish your tits were big. Hey,
I wish they were, but hey, look, they're real and they're magnificent.
The Russian bloggers are all over Putin about the incident with the 63. Well, now they're saying maybe even more casualties.
Yeah, more casualties. Yeah.
And you have an article about that we just published, as you can see right there. It was an hour ago, maybe a couple or so hours at this point, at scottritterextra.com. So probably most folks haven't read it yet since it was just published, but do you want to say a few words to whet their appetite and drive them to scottritterextra.com?
Well, sure. This was written largely in response to what I deem to be the irresponsible and unprofessional criticism that was levied on Vladimir Putin and everybody else about the tragedy that took place at, I think it's Mavica is the name of the town, the school number 19, a vocational school that was used by the Russians to billet around 400 soldiers, plus or minus. People from a communications unit, people from a special forces unit, and a lot of people from an artillery unit coming from a training ground, recently mobilized people. Tragic. I mean, all death is tragic, but these guys were mobilized. They were sent. They hadn't had a chance to get integrated in the units. They were waiting. It was New Year's, and boom, they got killed by a HIMARS attack. We don't know the death toll yet. The Russians initially announced 63. Since then, they've upped it to 89. My guess is that number will go up as debris is removed and bodies are discovered, but I don't know. But the very first thing that happened when this attack happened with these bloggers is they started repeating Ukrainian propaganda straight off the bat. Boom. And that tells you where they're coming from. These people pretend to be pro-Russian, but they're not. They do nothing more than put forward Ukrainian propaganda, the talking points, the narrative of the Ukrainian intelligence service working with the CIA. I'm on to you guys. I know what you're up to. And when they go, 600 dead, it's like, no, not 400 dead, not 200 dead, not yet. I mean, I can't guarantee there won't be 200 dead eventually, but no. But they're shouting out now. The first thing is Putin is a loser, a disgrace. He's disgusting. Shoigu should be shot. The poor spokesperson of the Russian military who has to deliver the news, he should be gutted and hung by the neck by his entrails. He's a horrible human being. His family should be slaughtered, gutted, fed to pigs. Literally, this is what they're saying. And they're not addressing the issue. I mean, there are two aspects to what happened there. The first one is, how did it happen? And this is a fair point of inquiry. And had they limited their discussion to this and asked these questions in a professional manner, I'd be all on their side. Why in God's name did the Russian leadership put so many people into a single place, a known place, so close to the front lines? I mean, you're literally setting it up for the Ukrainians. It's like putting the ball on the tee and letting, Babe Ruth come up, and he's just going to knock it out of the park every time. You put that many people in the in the building, and there's some talk. The Russians are saying, Russian government saying that it was done by cell phones, that everybody's using a cell phone calling home. It was New Year's Eve. I'm sure people are calling home, hey, mom, selfie, and of course, cell phones can be hacked into. You get the GPS notification, the signals can be intercepted, and you can triangulate. There's any number of ways to figure out exactly where the cell phone is coming from. But and here's the other thing. They're not supposed to have cell phones. Rule number one, when you enter the combat zone, the cell phones are supposed to be collected by the leadership and removed, taken away, so that you don't have this kind of thing happening. It's sort of what we do in the military. Fitbit is a big deal. And people were running around with their Fitbits, all these really fit special forces guy who should know better. And all of a sudden, people are looking up on the map. People are, because you can download the Fitbit onto a computer and it shows you where you run and all this GPS map. And their path gives them the exact perimeter of all these top secret bases all around the world. And basically, Fitbit is disclosing everything where people are deployed and all this stuff. And the military finally had to say, no more Fitbits. You can't do that. You're broadcasting stuff. The same thing with various social media apps and everything. You have people on aircraft carriers who are posting stuff, and it's giving away the position of the aircraft carrier, maybe potentially tipping off adversaries about upcoming operations, etc. So, the U.S. has a problem with it too. I think every military in the world has a problem with this. So for these Russian bloggers to pretend that this is a unique problem to Russia and their leadership sucks because, oh my God, these people did it. You guys are fools. You're idiots. You don't know what you're talking about. So just shut up, because you're not trying to solve the problem. I mean, it's a fair question to ask. But, the other big question is that the Ukrainians would have known this anyways, because I can guarantee you the United States has multiple satellites flying over day and night, tracking all of these places, tracking the movement of people. And we know the United States prepares reports on movement, unit locations, etc., and they provide them to the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians will see a report that says, this unit has moved into School 19. This unit moved into School 19. They'll look at a photograph that shows vehicles all there, people lined up. People get off of buses, photograph takes a bus, whatever. So the Ukrainians would have known this anyways. So it doesn't matter about cell phones. It doesn't matter about anything. The bottom line is they should never have been in that building. You disperse your assets. If you need to keep 200 men together like that, then keep them together in the rear, out of range. But when you bring them into a forward area, they need to be broken up into component, units, smaller units, and dispersed. And when they disperse tactically, that means that you maybe have, 2 guys in a hole here, 5 guys in a hut here, spread it out so that if the HIMARS comes in, it's only going to kill, 10 people, which is a lot if you're one of those 10 people, but it ain't 89. But they didn't do that. And this is a fair question for the leadership to ask. Other things that have been brought up is the potential that some people may have raised this issue to the Russian command prior, saying, hey, we're very vulnerable here. What are we going to do about it? And the command didn't react. Shame on the command. And again, this is the kind of thing that people should investigate. But again, to pretend that this is unique to Russia and that somehow we have to gut somebody and hang him by the neck by his entrails, it's just foolish. One only has to remember when the Marines went to Beirut, and I'm picking on the Marines right now, and I'm a Marine, and I'll kill you if you criticize the Marine Corps, but I'm going to tell you what happened. We went to Beirut, and we put every Marine into the damn, Beirut barracks. And then the rules of engagement were such that we couldn't have a tow missile loaded up in the tow launcher. We couldn't have magazines inserted in the M16s. And so a suicide vehicle was able to approach and close with, penetrate, blow up, and kill 241 Marines and sailors and soldiers. 241. This is a bad day. But, it doesn't mean that the entire Marine Corps is corrupt, that the leadership sucks, because those same Marines there will turn around and kick the ass of anybody in the world in a stand-up fight, including you, Strelkov. Remember that. You ain't a Marine. So, this concept of criticism. But then the other point, so once we get past that, and, Putin has formed this commission is going to investigate, and hopefully some answers come out of that investigation. If Russia's like any other nation in the world, this will be political in nature. They'll try and sweep some things under the rug. Other things will be exposed. That's just the way it works. It's not right. It's wrong. We do it. The Brits do it. Everybody does it. And hopefully Putin won't allow it to happen, but it may happen. But the bigger issue is, and people bring this up, why aren't the Russians interdicting the HIMARS? How did that system fire? You are incompetent. Clearly, Strelkov, the genius from wherever he's from, I would have had the solution. I would have been able to stop the HIMARS. I would have done the right thing. I would have called in air support. I would have done this because I am God. You're not. History shows that mobile relocatable targets are the most difficult things in the world to hit. And people that are 400 times more experienced than Strelkov and his ilk have been trying to do this for years. Go back to World War II, Operation Crossbow, the operation led by the British with American assistance to destroy V1 and V2 rockets before they could be launched. It was the number one priority of the British Air Force, the number one priority. That means it's number one. It ain't number two, number three, number four. Number one. They allocated 40% of the British heavy bomber resources to do this. They didn't treat it lightly, and it didn't succeed. Are you telling me that the British are incompetent? They don't know what they're doing? Or maybe it's just a tough problem set. The only way the V1 and V2 rockets stopped firing is when the British military defeated the Nazis, advanced, and took the last remaining launchers. The Gulf War. Bing, 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 bing. That's my war. That's the one that I fought in. That's the one where I was heavily involved in the counter-Scud operation. You know, those Iraqi mobile missiles that are a derivative of the V2 rocket, put on an 8-wheel vehicle with a launch arm. It was a big deal because Israel said if we get hit by one missile, we're coming into the conflict. And if Israel entered the conflict, the whole coalition would fall apart. Iraq wins. So we're not talking about an insignificant consequence here. We had to stop those missiles from launching, and we did everything we could. 2,500 sorties, including F-15E Strike Eagles with the most modern equipment, A-10s flying in low. We brought in Delta Force. Hey, Strelkov, they'll kick your ass too. British SAS, yeah, they got you too, Strelkov. You know, these are really professional people here, and they were in there. They were trying. Not a single Scud was killed. Not a single Scud was killed. And guess what else we did? We deployed Patriot batteries all over the place. We sent them to Israel. We deployed them all throughout the Arabian Peninsula. And you know how many missiles they actually successfully intercepted? Zero. These are good people, professional people. This is just a tough target, a very tough target. So now we come to Russia and what I call the counter HIMARS campaign. Someday a book will be written about it because this is a critical aspect of this war, a war which, by the way, Strelkov, Russia is going to win. Your negativity isn't going to stop this, but it's a difficult campaign. We won Operation Desert Storm, but we didn't kill a single Scud. We won World War II. With the help of the Soviets, but we didn't stop the V1 and V2 rockets from flying, and Russia's going to win this war, even though I'm telling you right now, they will never stop the HIMARS rockets from being launched because it's a hard target. One of the things we dealt with in the Gulf War were decoys. I mean, the thing that got me involved was when I started to ask questions like, there are 19 Iraqi mobile missile launchers, and yet on week 2, the U.S. Air Force has claimed to have killed 75 mobile missile launchers. Simple Marine math doesn't work. We're killing something obvious that isn't a mobile lit missile launcher. And the fact that the Iraqis continue to launch mobile missiles means we ain't killing what we're supposed to be killing. Why? And what we found out is a number of things: effective camouflage, concealment, and the use of decoys. We now know that the Ukrainians are using decoy HIMARS that are being put out in a way assisted by the United States in terms of placement regarding Soviet or Russian collection capabilities. The Russians are collecting it, determining that's a target, firing their caliber missiles and sending their drones in, and they're killing things they think are HIMARS. This is why the Russians are saying, we got 3 HIMARS yesterday. And of course, the Russian bloggers, they don't know what they're talking about. They're making it up. They're liars. No, they're not. They're professionals who think they actually killed something, but they're killing a decoy. Strelkov, if you were an intelligence officer and you actually track this kind of stuff, you might know what you're talking about, but you don't. So, this is the problem. And the bottom line is, as long as the Ukrainians have this very difficult to target weapon, and that weapon is employed using information from the United States, because one of the important aspects of this conflict is that the United States is telling the Ukrainians when the window of vulnerability is open and closed regarding Russian satellites and other Russian collection assets. So they're getting a little book that says, red light, green light. Green light means go to where we tell you to go. Red light means stop, hide, duck, cover, because they're looking for you. And we're cueing the HIMARS. We're moving it when the Russians can't see it, or at least we hope they can't see it. So the Ukrainians are getting a lot of help in this. And it's just a hard target. And the bottom line is the HIMARS is going to be a weapon up until the day Russia wins the war. The HIMARS will stop firing when Russia captures the last resisting Ukrainian unit. And that's just the way it's going to be.
All right, there's the spoken word argument. And if you want to soak in the details, you can read all about it at scottritterextra.com. Scott, before we move on to our next question, 2 quick questions about your health. In Tuesday's episode, you mentioned that you just got some medication. So my 2 questions are, have you noticed any improvement? It doesn't sound like it, unfortunately. And the other question is, did the doctor tell you how long it would take for you to notice an improvement?
I'm going to have to go to HIPAA here, and I can't tell you what's going on. You have no need to know. No, I'll tell you. There was concern because his cough lasted so long that it might be pneumonia. The doctor doesn't believe it's pneumonia. He did a full examination, and what he thinks is that I have a long-term cough, and what needs to happen is my lungs need to be opened up. So he's provided me with a steroid-based inhaler, and it's opening up my lungs. And the reason why I'm coughing right now is all the garbage that was in there is coming out, and things are getting better. I'm going to get better, and we hope that this will be done within a month.
Okay. That sounds like good news. I'm glad I asked, because it didn't sound so good until you gave that explanation. Daniel from Perth, Australia. I have read energy analysts such as Alex Turnbull who say the gas crisis is over. I would be interested in your response. And Scott, take a look at this tweet. He has sent this to me along with the question. This is what he's referring to. It says here that the gas storage is almost as high as in early 2020.
Yeah, but Alex, what percentage of the gas stored is LNG, and what percentage of the gas stored was Russian gas purchased prior to the crisis? The crunch point that most energy analysts that I'm familiar with talk about is what's going to happen next winter. You see, I mean, first of all, let's be honest. The winter right now has been very mild, and so these gas reserves haven't been tapped into, and so Europe might be lucky and dodge a big bullet, meaning that they're not going to draw down significantly the reserves, and they'll roll into 2020, the 2023 winter with sufficient stock so that it isn't going to break the bank to buy gas to replenish it up to 100%. But if there comes a cold snap, and remember these are reserves that are meant to last a month, maybe a little bit more. Yes, for cigarettes, thanks. If it gets really cold, remember, winter didn't start until December 21st. So we're not even a month into winter yet. And if it gets really, really cold, these gas reserves will be depleted. And if they're depleted, this $28 gas he's talking about, plus it's going to be more expensive than $28. They're not going to be able to afford to fill it up. And then they're going to roll into next winter. And what? You're going to pray that it's a warm, mild winter? I disagree with them, absolutely. The other thing is really the gas crisis is over. What a sort of narrow window of analysis you got there. Ask German industry, is the gas crisis over? The German industry that shut down because they can't afford the gas to keep their plants heated. I think the gas crisis is alive and well and living. Ask the French. Ask Durex, the big the glass company. They shut down. Why? Can't afford to stay in business. Ask the Germans about all the jobs that are fleeing Germany to the United States because they can't afford to stay in business there. So I think the gas crisis is alive, well, and it's going to be here for a long, long time.
Scott is speaking tomorrow night at the Bethlehem Public Library in his hometown of Delmar, New York, which is why we're on tonight instead of the usual Friday night. So if you're in that neck of the woods and you want Scott to cough all over you, this is your opportunity.
But just in case people are watching and they take what you say seriously, I took a COVID test and it was negative. Okay. So I'm not.
Inflammation is not contagious.
I am not a threat to anybody.
At least in that regard. You're not.
Correct.
You're not. You're not like a guy wearing a leather jacket. Not that kind of a threat. Rob H. from Virginia. Virginia is for lovers, is the rumor going around. In regards to the evolving national mistrust and the Russian Federation president's shift in outlook towards the West, referring to them as enemies, along with a more aggressive military posture, could this be the prelude to a second Cold War?
Oh, Rob, we're in the Cold War.
Way past the prelude stage, huh?
We're way past the prelude stage. Let me put it this way. During the entirety of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviets trusted one another enough to have negotiations, to maintain dialogue, etc. When the Soviets sat across from their American counterparts and the Americans sat across from their Soviet counterparts, they treated them as professionals. They recognized that they had ideological differences and that they had these differences manifested themselves in, geopolitical clashes that could lead to the potential of a war. But at no time did they say, we can't even trust you to talk to you anymore. And that's where Russia is today about the United States. I mean, yes, I know they're going to say, well, the United States says the same thing about Russia. Tell me the last time Russia lied to the United States. Can't. I can tell you the last time the United States lied to Russia. Every time they opened their mouth. Russia didn't pull out of the INF Treaty. We did. Russia didn't pull out of the ABM Treaty. We did. Russia didn't pull out of the Open Skies Treaty. We did. Russia didn't violate the New START Treaty. We are. And then Russia didn't play stupid games like Minsk. I mean, look at Minsk. Putin actually in 2014 could have literally destroyed the Ukrainian army. He had them surrounded, 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers, which at that time for the Ukrainian military was a significant number, were surrounded and they were all going to be killed, wounded, or captured, annihilated. That's why the Ukrainians begged Merkel and Hollande to come in and save them. So the Germans and the French came in and they talked with Putin. They said, we want to have a ceasefire. And that ceasefire will lead to what you want, what you ethnic Russians in Russia want, a change in the constitution that guarantees the cultural rights of the ethnic Russian population. But in exchange, Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk will remain part of Ukraine. And Putin went, good. Everybody's out there. Putin's wanting to steal the Donbass. He didn't want it. He wasn't trying to get it. Frankly speaking, couldn't afford to get it even if he wanted to get it because the Donbass had spent since the 90s as part of Ukraine just devolving into nothing. Whereas the rest of Russia, simply put, it's a challenge to anybody out there. Pick a Russian city, pick one point, and start in 1999 when Putin became president. And because there's that old question, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? We like to ask that question here in America when we're evaluating the president. Are you better off today? The answer for every Russian except Navalny is yes. And how do I back this up? From 1999 to 2022, that'll give you, Marine Corps math, 23 photographs. Take 23 photographs of the same place and then do that old trick where you do it, like a movie theater thing. And what you'll see is a city becoming better, infrastructure developing, houses being rebuilt, repainted, roads being repaved, a city coming to life, a nation coming to life. And this is Russia. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, do the same thing. You see a city dying, a nation dying. Donbass was Ukraine. And the Russians, Putin was advised by many of his top economic people, we don't want it because we can't afford it. We got to bring them up. If we bring them into Russia, we got to bring them up to Russian standards, and that'll break the bank. We're not ready to do that. So at no time was Russia seeking to get Donbass integrated into Russia. At no time. The only time this became something they had to do was when they were compelled to do it because Merkel, Poroshenko, and Hollande lied about Minsk. They weren't looking for a ceasefire. They were looking for a timeout so they could build up the Ukrainian military, the one that they rescued from disaster through the Accords, trained them to NATO standards, and then use them for offensive military operations against the ethnic Russians in Donbass and to liberate Crimea. The whole program of the West was war, war, war. The whole program for Russia was peace. Minsk was peace. And look at Putin today. He had to admit, I was wrong, he said. How many times do you get a leader to say, I was wrong? Putin says, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. I was naive. I was naive in 2014. I believed them when they said we wanted peace. And the Russians pushed for the implementation of the Minsk Accords all the way up to the last moment. This war could have been stopped if Ukraine simply said, yep, we're signing, we're in. We're all in. There would have been no war. No war whatsoever. But Ukraine opted out because it was never about peace for Ukraine. It was always about war. Ukraine always wanted war. They were always preparing for war. And they were backed by the French, the Germans, and the Americans who built the base in Western Ukraine in 2015 that trained 1 battalion of Ukrainians every 55 days for 8 straight years. Around 30,000 Ukrainian troops were trained at that base. There were 2 other NATO bases. Between 60 and 90,000 Ukrainians were trained to NATO standards. That's a significant force. And they were trained to do one thing, fight the Russians. So now we come back to the new Cold War. Russia doesn't trust the West. They don't know how to talk to Anatoly Antonov, the Russian ambassador. He's a former arms control guy. He helped negotiate the New START treaty. Read the interviews he gives to the Washington Post, New York Times, and others. He says, I'm a bird in a cage. I'm an arms control expert. I'm an American expert. My job as ambassador is to make relations better, but all I can do right now is just sit in my home. The Americans don't want to talk. And even if we did want to talk, there's no one there that I'd want to talk to because they're all liars and cheaters. The Americans don't stand for anything. So it's a much worse situation right now because the only way we're going to get out of this without killing everybody is discussions, negotiations. But the United States has proven itself to be the worst possible negotiating partner, one you cannot trust. How can the Russians ever again sign a treaty with the United States? How can they? They can't. I mean, they're going to eventually, but are they going to believe the treaty? I mean, even if the Americans don't cheat, and I'm telling you, we cheat at everything we do, we'll withdraw from it when it becomes inconvenient. I mean, a treaty isn't meant to be convenient, solely for America. A treaty is not supposed to be only about America. A treaty is supposed to be mutually beneficial. So for the purpose of creating, a space for peace and prosperity. But that's not the American position. The American position is the treaty exists solely to give us an advantage. If you're the Russians, how can you begin to negotiate with that mindset? So no, this is worse than the Cold War. We're in something far more dangerous.
For those of you who want to find out for yourselves whether or not Scott's claims about how ordinary Russians feel, there's a real life way you can do that. And that's go participate on his Telegram, where there's plenty of real life Russians expressing themselves. And you can ask them what they think about Putin, what they think about anything at all. And they'll tell you. It's quite a lively scene. Yes,
yeah, they will. They're not shy about that.
It's quite a lively scene over there. All right, moving on. Miko from Serbia. Who do you see as the Biden administration's favorite to succeed Zelensky? Zalzuni, is that pronounced correctly, maybe? Poroshenko or Kliko? By the way, Kosovo is Serbia. Got to get some controversy in there. Thank you, Miko.
There we go. Yeah. Who do I think? I think right now, and I'll say it this way. I wrote an article a little while ago that discussed the New Yorker's article on the status of the war, and the way that article was framed, it focused almost exclusively on the Minister of Defense. Hell, that guy noticed. I put it that way because that's my own version of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists doomsday clock. I set that to a couple minutes to midnight because the world's about to end. Plus, if I let the clock work while we're talking, it would ding out. It's a beautiful clock. It makes wonderful chimes, but the chimes would drown out everything. So I decided to make the clock symbolic of the pending fate of the world. So it's at a couple minutes to midnight. And it's going to be that way as long as I'm doing shows like this. When I become highly unpopular, which could be very soon, I'll go ahead and make the clock work again, because then I don't have to worry.
Which is going to happen first, that or are you back on Twitter first?
Well, we'll find out.
While you're coughing, in case folks missed the opening, let me just tell you what you're seeing there is a version of a tweet that's on my Twitter feed at the top. It's pinned, and I'm asking everybody who's on Twitter to go there and retweet it so we can get Elon Musk's attention. There it is, at Citizen Jeff. That's my handle on Twitter, and that's what we're using to make sure we get his attention. We'll find out once and for all whether or not he's for real about free speech. All right, go on.
Now back to the question that was asked, because we have a tendency sometimes to get sidetracked and then we move on and we don't answer the question. And later on, people are like, why do I even bother answering his question? He doesn't answer them, which is a fair point. But anyway, the point of the New Yorker magazine was the emphasis that was placed on the defense, on the military, both the Minister of Defense and the commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Zaluzhny. And then we see the Economist, which is very much a mouthpiece of the transatlantic establishment, emphasizing its discussion with Zaluzhny. Zelensky was present, but he wasn't part of that discussion. And what I think what we're seeing here, and then you take a look at the fact that Zaluzhny said in the Economist interview that he needed 300 tanks, 500 armor fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, unlimited ammunition to be able to win this conflict. But nobody's given it to him. And Zelensky came to the United States, broke script when he was meeting with Biden in Congress. Instead of just doing what he's supposed to do, he dared ask for more and was told no. So you have the general saying, I can win if I get this, but if I don't get it, we're going to lose. And Zelensky said, well, give me more. And they said no, which means there's sort of an expectation of loss. And I think they're setting up the military to be the ones to replace Zelensky, whether it be Zaluzhny or somebody else. And the Russians, you got to listen to what the Russians say, because they talk about denazification, and Zaluzhny, of course, took an infamous selfie where Stepan Bandera is in the background. And now normally that would disqualify you for life, from life, because you're a Nazi at that point in time. But the Russians aren't saying that. What the Russians are saying is he's a professional. He's a man who has done a good job. He's a good leader. He's a hard fighter. They're saying the kind of things that you need to say about someone if you're going to sit across the table from them, because I can tell you that the Russians aren't going to sit across the table from Zelensky, because the Russian people won't accept that. Zelensky has discredited himself. He's a disgrace, and any negotiated settlement with Zelensky will have no gravitas, no viability, no credibility amongst the Russian people. But if the Russians set Zaluzhny up and say he's a man of honor, somebody we can do business with, then the Russian people say, okay, let's give him a chance. Odious ideology of Bandera. So I think that's the case.
Yes.
Klitschko, no. I mean, Klitschko, we have problems with Klitschko. Again, we go back to Victoria Nuland in 2014, the intercepted conversation. Yats is our boy. The reason why they're promoting Yats, they're promoting Yats over whom? Klitschko. I mean, Klitschko was a player back then, but we didn't like him. We couldn't control him. And Klitschko's a problem now because as the mayor of Kiev, he's high profile. And, he's out there right now beginning to run a campaign against Zelensky. So Klitschko has thrown his hat into the ring. But Klitschko doesn't have the same credibility amongst the Russian population. The reason why I keep bringing up the Russian population is whoever replaces Zelensky is going to be the person that will be called upon to sit at the table as the Russians dictate the terms of surrender to Ukraine. And so I don't think it's going to be Klitschko. I think it will probably be somebody from the military, and that's that.
Are you forgetting that Zelensky was interviewed by none other than David Letterman on a subway platform?
No, I didn't forget that, Jeff.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why I think he's toast.
Okay. A friendly face from Russia, or as we sometimes say, Mother Russia. There are rumors that Russia will use the latest T-14 tanks in the upcoming offensive. How likely is it? How likely is that to happen, and what would be your assessment of its combat capabilities?
Well, I can't assess its combat capabilities until it's gone into combat. So all I can talk about is how the Russians have promoted it. But we also have to note that the T-14 has had some growing pains. There's been some problems with it. One thing, it's a very expensive system. The Russians aren't able to produce it in the numbers that that they would like to. It's a system that's built for offensive operation. I think that they have quantities of these that can maybe a couple of brigades could be equipped with that. Not even, though. I think it's too expensive, and I don't think they have enough. The tank that's really the one to watch is the T-90 MB3. I think but it's a tank that has all these sensors. I mean, you shoot a round in, it detects, it shoots a shotgun shell out to blow it up first. It can do all sorts of sexy stuff. And I think they call it the Breakthrough. I think that's its nickname. And they then got a lot of these. And then they got some advanced T-80s that are also very well equipped with similar defensive systems. And then the latest model of the T-72 also is very well equipped. The Russians have a lot of these. I think you're going to see, I think that the weapon that's going to be key is going to be the T-90, not the T-14. I don't think there's enough T-14s out there. I do think the Russians, there's indication that the Russians have deployed them to an area, but one of the key elements of the Russian approach to war is mass. And the T-14 was designed with Russian tactics and operations in mind. So you can't evaluate if they produced 500 of them, and you saw the T-14 operate in mass the way it was designed to operate, coordinated with one another, et cetera, then I could evaluate it because it's a system designed to work within an organization. But if you have a limited number of T-14s, that means that the T-14 will never be able to operate the way it was intended to, with a whole bunch of other T-14s operating according to Russian operational doctrine. There's always going to be some hesitancy with limited numbers. So I don't think we're going to get to see the T-14 do what it's supposed to do. I do think we're going to get to see the T-90 do what it's supposed to do, and I do think that'll probably be one of the decisive weapons in the upcoming Russian offensive.
Okay, somebody asked what kind of wine I'm drinking. It's an Italian, there it is, Montepulciano di Abruzzo from 2020.
Jeff,
yes,
just a pro tip, you need to get a relationship with a wine dealership and become a wine promoter. And
I'm accepting offers. We'll see who makes the bid. It's open to bids. We'll see who comes in.
The bids.
Yes.
I'll become a wine dealer. Jeff, I bid $1.
Andreas Hartmann from good old Germany. One of the real successes of the globalists in the Ukraine war is the decoupling of Europe from Russia. How definitive is this decoupling?
It depends on whose perspective. The coupling of Europe and Russia was predicated by the realities of the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell and collapsed and Europe and the West moved in the 1990s. It was as carpetbaggers, as occupiers. They came in and they dictated terms to Russia. And so that, the fabric, the economic fabric of cooperation that was woven was done on those terms, which were sort of one-sided to the West. That has been decoupled, broken completely. And not because Russia wanted to do it, it's because the West insisted on it. The divorce came from the West. but it was something that needed to happen from the Russian perspective. It was very politically difficult for Putin or anybody else to talk about decoupling that because it was woven so tightly. The political consequences of trying to unplug the economic problems that would be created by that would be a political problem for Putin. And, he's not a dictator. He has to run for election. He needs votes. And if you alienate 20 to 30% of the Russian population who are part of this fabric, you could lose the election. So Putin could never decouple, even though he understood that by being linked to the West the way they were, the West always had undue leverage on Russia, economically and even politically. But the West did Putin the biggest favor in the world. They decoupled. They unplugged. And Russia's grateful for that. I mean, Putin's almost smiling, saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, that doesn't mean that Russia will never again deal with the West. But when the time comes for Russia to deal with the West, it's not going to be the West coming in and dictating the terms of cooperation with Russia. It's going to be Russia going to Europe and dictating the terms of cooperation to Europe. A completely different scenario, one that liberates Russia politically and economically from the colonial type mindset of Europe. So look, Russia is part of Europe. You can't undo that, no matter how much the Europeans want to. Russia is part of Europe. And the Russians view themselves as part of Europe, not Europe, but part of Europe. And at the end of the day, Europe needs Russia. Russia needs Europe. That's just the reality of it. You can't build a wall and say never the two shall meet. There's going to be interaction, but the interaction that takes place will be done on Russia's terms. This isn't Boris Yeltsin's Russia. This isn't the 1990s. This isn't weak Russia. This is Vladimir Putin's Russia, a completely different Russia, a strong Russia, and one that didn't buckle under the sanctions of the West. I mean, it's like going into a boxing ring and you got your best Sunday punch and you go up to the guy, you go, bam! And you're like, that should have knocked him out. And he's just standing there looking at you going, really? At that point in time, the best thing to do is just concede the fight and leave. The West came in and gave Russia its best Sunday punch. Russia didn't buckle. I think that's a signal to the West that Russia's got their number economically. Russia has a relationship with China, with the West, a growing relationship with Eurasia. This Eurasian Economic Union is a reality, and it's going to keep Russia alive. Europe had this the hubris, this arrogance that if Russia decouples, Russia will collapse because Russia can't survive without Europe. I think what we found out is Europe can't survive without Russia.
I'm looking at your Bob Dylan poster, so I want to tell folks the reason that Scott's camera wasn't set at the beginning is because I violated my own rule today. Usually everybody on our team except me wants to have chit-chat before we start, and I'm the one who's always, no, we got to make sure the camera's right. We got to make sure the mic's right. But today I got carried away waxing poetic about Bob Dylan in an attempt to lure Tori into discovering him. And I think we worked her into a fever pitch. But if anybody in the audience wants to, in the comments, suggests anything that might, be a good way for her to get her feet wet with Bob Dylan, let's do that. Calibrew from Maryland. From the little of his history I know, I have been very impressed with Smedley Butler. What's your take on him?
Man of great integrity. Smedley Butler, of course, is a Marine Corps general who won 2 Medals of Honor, but he's also somebody that once he got out of the Marine Corps, there were 2 things. One, he reflected on his time, and he basically came out and said war is a racket, and that when my time in the Marine Corps, we were serving the interests of American corporations and not defending the country. And, he called people out on that. And he's also somebody who exposed a potential coup against Franklin Roosevelt. So he's a man who understands, priority. He wasn't a fan of Franklin Roosevelt, but he understood that constitutionally you can't have businessmen working with the military to overthrow the elected government of the United States. So a man of great integrity. Is he perfect? No. Read his bio. First of all, he's his own harshest critic, and he will tell you, where he thinks certain aspects of his bio have been exaggerated, etc. But like any, man who is humble, he's his own harshest critic. But the fact of the matter is, he has more courage in his little pinky than 9/10 of the people in the world have in their full body. Smedley Butler deserves every bit of praise that he can possibly get.
A master from Western Australia. Could you detail how the weaponry supplied by the West makes it to the front lines? Is some weaponry flown into Kiev, shipped into Odessa, or is it all via road and train from neighboring Poland? Could Russia just destroy the transport infrastructure routes from Poland?
Well, let me put it this way. There's weaponry of strategic value, and then there's weaponry that, and what I'm getting at is if something's destroyed that could be easily replaced, you don't put as much time and effort into trying to get it to the front lines than you do with something that's unique. Example, a HIMARS system versus machine gun ammunition. Machine gun ammunition, I'm not going to spend $1 billion trying to get to the front lines. If a train or a truck gets blown up with machine gun ammunition, I can get another one. HIMARS, very expensive system. What's going on is that the United States has sent in CIA paramilitary operatives and personnel from the Joint Special Operations Command, and their job is to facilitate the transfer of material from the border to the front lines. They're not fighting. They're not there to do combat. And what they're doing is they're building what I call rat lines. And a rat line is basically a system to get equipment from point A to point B without having been detected and destroyed. They're working with U.S. intelligence that's tracking all the satellites that the United States, the United States has just tracking all the Russian satellites, all the Russian collection. And they're looking for gaps. They're looking for windows of vulnerability. So as material comes in, it's going to cross the border at a point in time when Russia's not looking. That's the idea. The other thing they factored in is response times. So, and this one I understand greatly because I used to do this for a living. We can detect something. Let's say we have a satellite that takes real-time imagery, hypothetically speaking. And so I'm on my little screen and bing, there it is. I called up. Picture, beautiful. Look, now I have to assess the picture. I have to look at it, a computer enhance it, and all this stuff. I bring in my fellow photo interpreters and we look for stuff and we come up with something. And then we look for corroborating intelligence. Is there SIGINT? Is there something that tells me that this is what I think it is? And that takes time. It's not instant. Strelkov, the photo don't speak to you. I keep bringing up Strelkov because he's somebody who thinks that he knows everything. It isn't instant. The photograph doesn't come up and say, hey, look at quadrant 360 at pixel 24. That's going to break the code. No, you have to do that. And that takes time. Then you write your report. And that report then goes to somebody bigger who decides this is actionable, and they turn it over to the targeteers. The targeteers receive it, determine what kind of target it is, and they allocate the resources to the task. So they have to put out, if it's an airplane, you actually have to tell the pilot to take off with the proper bombs, and they have to plan that mission, because if you don't plan that mission, that pilot's going to get shot down. So they have to factor in a whole bunch of stuff too, such as what is hostile air defense, things of that nature, time of flight, refueling, all this kind of stuff. Combat search and rescue in case the plane gets shot down. Everything has to be factored in. And then the plane launches, and gosh, there might have been a couple hours, sometimes a day or longer, that's transpired from the time the photo was taken to the time you react. And the special forces guys know this. So even if the satellite can take the picture, what they're going to do is say, when that satellite passes over, we assume they saw us. Now, what are we going to do about this? How do we then react? Where do we go so the Russians can't predict where we went? How do we hide? And they're moving this stuff, sprint by sprint by sprint by sprint by sprint to the front lines. And they're very effective at it. They're very good at it. Blood on the Tracks is one of the best Bob Dylan albums ever.
Yeah, I love that album too. The Divorce
Rosemary
album.
and the Queen and the Jack of Hearts is one of the best songs ever written.
That's like a movie.
It is a movie.
Yeah.
But the point is, I think that's how it's being done. It's not by luck. It's not by happenstance. It's a lot of skill involved, and there's a lot of people involved in getting this stuff moved to the front. This is one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are able to sustain their operations the way they are, because they're being backed up by the finest resources the United States and NATO can provide.
All right, we talked over each other. Tori, that was Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts.
Jack of Hearts, yeah.
It's all verses. There is no chorus in that song. It is all verses, and it's like 10 minutes long or something like that, and it's like a movie, a script to a movie. Fantastic.
Oh, cool.
Hello, Tori. How are you, darling? By the way, people were a little confused. Tori now has a day job, and so on Tuesday, people are saying, "Where's Tori?" Well, she's not with us on Tuesdays anymore. Kevin Michelizzi is backstage on Tuesdays, and Tori is still with us for the nighttime version. And boy, are we glad.
Me too.
All right, sweetheart. Vladimir Petrov, or maybe Petrov from Moscow. Has General Surovikin impressed you with his methods? He seems to have stopped the Ukrainian offensive. I feel confident as a Russian that we're being led by somebody who will give us victory in the upcoming offensive.
Look, I'm impressed with him. He's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. We can sit here and nitpick all day long. Strelkov will. But the fact of the matter is, he has been given, he is the unified commander. That's something that didn't exist prior to September. He's been made the unified commander, or maybe October. He gets to do pretty much everything except use nuclear weapons. And so he has a lot of latitude. And I've been impressed with a couple things. One, his patience. He's not somebody who came in. One of the first marks of a bad commander, for my opinion, is a guy that comes in and immediately tells everybody, put your bayonet in the ground. You're going to die here, not one step backwards. We're going to hold this ground, hold this ground. That means you have no imagination. He came in and he went, no, we're not defending that. We're not defending that. We're not defending that. We're going to consolidate our lines here. Now pull back a little bit more here. Why? To save lives, save resources. And then when he received reinforcements, he didn't do the political thing, because everybody's like, when are you going on the offensive? When are you going on the offensive? No, defend, build his defenses, correct the mistakes that got Russia to where they are. Not enough manpower on the lines, thinly defended lines, no defense in depth. And so he's doing all that. And of course, the Russian bloggers are like, he's building a defensive line 20 kilometers back. Hey, guys, read Russian doctrine. That's sort of what you do, especially when you're fighting an enemy that has shown a propensity to infiltrate your front lines and penetrate the depth of your positions by 20 kilometers. Imagine being prepared for that. So that's what Surovikin's doing. He's building up these defenses, and these defenses will serve as the anchor for what's to come. Because he's not going to have to strip the defenses bare. One of the problems that Russia and Ukraine's running this problem now, that if you want to carry out an operation at point X, you have to pull troops out of points Y and Z, thereby weakening points Y and Z to carry out the operation at X. And the Russians had to do that too. One of the reasons why the Ukrainians succeeded is that when they threatened Kherson in late August, early September, the Russians took the reserves from Kharkov and brought them down to build up these lines. And that weakened the lines there. And then the Ukrainians were able to shift over and penetrate and achieve the victories they did. So what the general's doing right now is ensuring that when Russia goes on the offensive, they're not giving the Ukrainians any opportunities. The defensive lines will be held. They're defended in depth, in detail, by doctrine. And there's plenty of offensive combat power still getting mobilized, by the way, about 10 to 15 divisions worth, that's going to come in and be able to be employed without worrying about the thinning of your defensive lines. This guy's doing it right. And I also think that he will do the offensive right. I think he will have achievable objectives. I don't think he's going to outstrip his capabilities. I think, he's also a commander that isn't going to trap himself into a single option. I think that he's going to have several options laid out, as you do if you're a good staff officer, and he's a good staff officer, and he has a good staff, and they're going to, say this is our primary objective. If the Ukrainians do something, and remember, no plan survives initial contact with the enemy. Law number one: you can have the greatest plan in the world, and once the war starts, throw it away, because it ain't going to happen the way you thought it's going to happen. And what you need to do is have the ability to say, that didn't work, therefore we are prepared to begin doing this. Oh, that didn't work. That's okay. We're now going to do this. That didn't work. Good. We pull back and we do plan D. And if all that doesn't work, maybe it's time to regroup and say, why isn't any of this working? Maybe we need to recalculate what we're doing. But I think that he's that kind of leader. I think he's a professional. I think he has a sound staff, a solid staff. There's a lot of people frustrated by him because he's moving slower than they want. I mean, again, all these armchair bloggers are out there, why aren't they doing this? Why haven't they done this? They're surrendering this. They're doing this. They're doing that. I mean, some of the most ridiculous things in the world. Putin, by the way, just, announced a ceasefire, Christmas ceasefire. There's a 36-hour ceasefire. The Russians are going to basically stop shooting on Christmas Eve and allow Christmas Eve to roll in and have a day of Christmas, of peace, so people can worship without fear of missiles coming in, etc. It was recommended to him by the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, and he went ahead and he signed a decree to that. Now, whether the Ukrainians are going to play ball, who knows? They so far they say they're not. But why did I? Why did I bring this up? Russian.
Well, let me just ask you: what is the significance of him calling the ceasefire? Is it strictly a matter of letting people worship, or is there some kind of political strategy to it?
Well, it's both.
Mm-hmm.
One, it's a humanitarian thing, but two, it puts Russia in a good light.
Yeah.
It puts Russia in a good light, the Christmas ceasefire. But all the bloggers this is treason, high treason. Putin should be hung, gutted, hung by his neck, by his entrails. And then the most ridiculous one I saw was, there is a strong probability, not possibility, probability that this ceasefire is being implemented because Russia is going to withdraw from the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and turn the city of Inogdar over to the Ukrainians. I'm like, really? Gosh, I've never wanted to smoke dope, but obviously what you're smoking is really good stuff. So give it to me, because I want to hallucinate like you are. These are some of the most virulently anti-Russian people I've ever run across. They're so unprofessional. They're so unrealistic, and they can't respect the fact that, Vladimir Putin is a smart politician. He's been the president of Russia for a long time. He's a good politician. He understands what's going on, and he made a smart move. There's no military disadvantage that's going to be accrued to Russia by this. They're not ready to go on the offensive yet. The troops are still being trained in the area. Wouldn't it be nice to have a pause for the cause? Yeah, they're going to say, well, the Ukrainians are going to regroup. 36 hours? I don't think so. You're not going to dramatically change the reality on the battlefield. Yeah, guys who are being pounded to death today get a 36-hour break. But that's the humanitarian aspect. And here's the other thing about that. You don't think during that 36 hours they're going to sit there and go, this is nice. I'm not being blown up. I'm not going to die. Wow. Wouldn't it be nice to continue doing this? How do I get the artillery to stop firing on me? And if my government's saying they refuse to negotiate with the Russians, maybe the problem is my government. So there's a lot of things going on with this 36 hours that goes beyond simply, it's a mind game. It's sending a signal to the West. And remember, the world isn't just the United States. Hey, America, hate to admit it. It's not just about America. Same thing with Europe. There's a big world out there full of Chinese and Indians and South Africans, and they're looking at this and they're not criticizing Putin. They're saying, bravo, bravo, good job, good job. So Putin's scoring big points where he needs to score big points, and it's not causing Russia any harm. So I think it's
you pointed out earlier that he's not a dictator. He has to win over the electorate. How clean are the Russian elections compared to ours?
Well, I don't know. How clean are ours? Let's start, because I'm going to compare. We have to basically understand what we're comparing. Money. Do you think American money plays a role in American elections? And the answer is yes. If you don't have millions of dollars, if you haven't sold your soul to the establishment, you don't get to participate in the adult elections. That is for Congress, Senate, or the president, or governor, or state senator. So right off the bat, we have the most fundamental corruption of all. If you don't have money, you can't run, you can't win, you can't participate.
Well, unless it's really fame. That's the issue. If you happen to be famous.
But the fame would bring in the money then. I mean, unless you're Donald Trump and you're willing to write that check yourself or con people into, giving you money through, however he did it. Right. But what
about the way votes are tabulated?
Well, let me put it this way. The Russians don't have to wait, 24, 36, 48, 72, 96 hours to find out what happened. You go to the election, you vote, you get your results, it's done. End of story. And that's the way elections should work. The whole world works that way. Only in America do we have suddenly we have to stop counting. We have to. Now, I'm not saying that is because of fraud, but it creates the perception of fraud. And that's worse. There's actually a security.
Also, it's a hodgepodge. It's not like it's the same everywhere.
Well, every state runs a different thing. In Russia, if you vote in Vladivostok, you're voting the same way that you vote in Moscow. The same way, same rules, same everything. It's uniform. In America, New York runs it one way, Pennsylvania runs it another way, California runs it another way. And how do you even begin to assess the credibility, the viability, the integrity of that election? So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Russia.
You don't know for sure, but what's your sense of how people in Russia perceive it? Is the consensus in Russia that elections are valid, or they think funny business is going on?
Well, I mean, you're always going to find people think there's a funny business going on. But let's put it this way. The funny business takes place before the election day. And what I mean by that is, but again, the fact is Putin could have lost on a couple occasions to the Communist Party candidate, because the Communist Party is still pretty powerful in Russia. I mean, it was a horse race. And so, Putin had to do what politicians do. You go out and you shake hands, you kiss babies. And because if you're president, you control the budget, you do amazing things like say, suddenly, oh, you needed that bridge built? Let's build that bridge. You needed this infrastructure? We're going to do this infrastructure. That's what politicians do. Is that corruption? Is that dirty? I don't know. It's just the way things are. But what the Russians aren't doing is going in and flicking a switch in the back of the voting booth and changing votes, retabulating votes. You pretty much know who's going to win the election on election day because the polls tell you. The polls say that, Navalny or the guy who got assassinated, Nemtsov, they never were going to pull more than, 5-7% of the vote, no matter what. They might get more. They might get 12% in Moscow. But nationally speaking, these guys were never even on the map. So how can you call an election corrupt when the guy that was never going to get more than 5% gets no more than 5%? That ain't a corrupt election. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. That's reality. Putin doesn't win the way Saddam Hussein won elections. When Saddam ran, he got 99% of the vote. Putin doesn't get 99% of the vote. There's a lot of people out there that vote against Vladimir Putin, and their votes are counted. And if enough of them voted against Putin, Putin wouldn't win the election. It'd be over. So I think Russia is a far more solid democracy. And if you want to talk about why Russian democracy is weak, understand this. From the very beginning, because Putin knew when he became president that Russian democracy, I mean, God, there was no democracy under Boris Yeltsin. Please, people understand this. A democratic leader doesn't put tanks in the street of Moscow and firearm the parliament as Yeltsin did in October of 1993. That isn't what a democratic leader does. That's what a dictator does. And Yeltsin was a dictator. And he wasn't even a dictator that was popular amongst the Russian population. The Communist Party should have won the 1996 election. But we, America, came in and stole the election for Yeltsin. Gosh. It's not like the theoretical interference in 2016. We really went in and stole it, and we brag about it. Time Magazine made a cover about it, how we stole the election, put Boris Yeltsin in, the best person American money can buy. Yeltsin wasn't a Democrat, and because of him, democracy in Russia was just a fundamentally flawed concept when Putin became president in 1999. So now, how does Putin move forward trying to build democracy? Because that was one of his objectives, stated objective. I want to transition Russia from this broken system that I inherited into a truly democratic system. But every time he tried to move in that direction, what did we in the West do? We didn't give him a chance. We went in and instead we bought opposition parties. When I say we bought them, MI6 bought them, CIA bought them. Gosh, Scott, are you just making that up? I don't know. Why don't you guys do research on something called the spy rock? It was put into Moscow by MI6, a nice little rock. Looked like a rock, didn't act like a rock, because inside the rock was a bunch of electronics. And all these Russians from these non-governmental organizations that are created by the West to promote democracy are walking by the rock with their little BlackBerry device, and they're sending signals and receiving signals from MI6, who's telling them what to do, telling where the money's going, how they're going to receive money, how to hide the money, how to do all this. Well, the Russian intelligence service, pretty good. They figured out what the rock was. They intercepted all that. They know everything. When they shut down the NGOs, everybody went, look how undemocratic Putin is. No, he shut them down because they all worked for Western intelligence. And so the critics of Russian democracy have to understand the reason why there is no viable democracy in Russia is because we ruined it. We're the ones that, instead of allowing Russia to develop its own opposition, Putin's not afraid of opposition. Putin believes in a good debate. But he's not going to debate the CIA. He's not going to debate MI6. He'll debate a legitimate Russian political opponent. But we don't allow that legitimacy. We have to control everything. We put in the NGOs. We put in USAID. The British put in a whole bunch of other foundations. And we destroyed Russian democracy. And so Putin's been struggling to try and come up with a system. And it's interesting. The last time he ran for president, he instituted some constitutional changes. And the idea was because this is his biggest fear. I think so. I mean, his biggest fear is when Vladimir Putin goes away, what happens? And if he hasn't built institutions capable of standing on their own 2 feet, because the problem with having a president that serves for so long that it almost becomes a cult of personality. And when he leaves, if there's nobody to replace him that's the same thing, it's going to collapse. And for Russia, this would be disaster. Russia's come too far to allow this collapse, to allow the United States to come back in and put the puppet strings on the future Boris Yeltsin and take control and ruin everything like we did in the 1990s. So Putin's trying to build institutions that will be able to govern if he's not there. But this isn't the way democracy is supposed to work. But it's not Putin's fault. Putin understands that he will probably leave office maybe sometime in 2024, 2030 in that area. He'll be a man of a ripe age, and it's probably time for him to leave. But when he leaves in 2030, he's going to have a system in place that can survive without him. And it's not going to be a democratic system because the West won't let it happen. One of the benefits of decoupling from the West is that Russia will become more insular. And in the process of becoming insular, there will be the potential for opposition to develop. But I think what Putin recognizes is he's going to have to put in place a system that guarantees that Russian interests are are taken care of first and foremost, a system that's impervious to Western attempts to penetrate. And if that system can sustain itself, then and only then can you talk about building genuine political opposition where you can have the kind of elections that we have in the West. Wait, we don't want that because we're corrupt. But anyways.
Well, you said that Time magazine essentially celebrated American interference in the Russian election when Yeltsin was propped up. Was that one of those Person of the Year things or something else?
I think it was a standalone cover that had Boris Yeltsin on. I mean, it's available. I can find it and send it to you and show it to you.
All right. Well, we know how much credibility the Person of the Year thing is. So that's why.
Well, I am Person of the Year, right there. It's on.
That's Time magazine. Little Rodney from Baltimore, Maryland. Why did the Russian military perform so poorly during the first Chechen War? Was Yeltsin solely to blame? See how there's a certain order here that kind of makes sense. How were there other factors at play? Would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I think the first Chechen War started 1993, 1994, maybe 1994, I think. And the Russians didn't do well at all. The first regiments that went into Grozny were actually surrounded and they were slaughtered. It wasn't a good day for the Russians. How did this happen? When the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian military was radically shrunk, and the budget was slashed. So you had, basically you had officers that weren't getting paid. You had conscripts that didn't have confidence in the system. There wasn't money for training. It was a racket. People were using the military to make money. Were selling equipment, etc. I mean, not to pick on Georgia, but at the same time that this Chechen crisis was going on, Georgia was going through some problems where they were trying to acquire equipment. And one of the ways the Georgians acquired equipment was to go to the local Russian garrisons and buy it from the Russians. There's corruption taking place. The Russians would say, the Georgians say, this is on our territory. This equipment belongs to us. And the Russians would say, no, but we'll sell you this. We'll give you that. We'll sell you this. And the stuff they're selling to the Georgians are supposed to appear on the Russian books, but they're not there. So the Russian military was just collapsing. It is to the credit of the Russian officer corps that the Russian military survived. The professionals who, especially in areas like their ballistic missile force, the people who safeguarded nuclear weapons, etc., the Russian officer corps stepped up to the task and kept the Russian military alive. Not perfect, not Rocky shape. I wouldn't be Ivan Drago fighting shape, but they kept it alive. But when they went into the Chechen conflict, the first one, they did not perform well. And one of the problems when you have troops that don't perform well is you can't. There's no predictability in combat. Now, there's no guaranteed outcomes, but you should have predictability, meaning that if I have a unit, I should be able to predict that the units can be able to perform to this level for this long. The Russians were putting units in there. Some units performed brilliantly, some didn't, but there was no way of knowing which unit was going to do well and when the unit would collapse. And when you have a military like that, brutality takes over, because as your professionalism is swept away, basically the human animalistic desire to survive takes over. And the first Chechen conflict was known for its brutality. And at the end of the day, brutality doesn't win over the hearts and minds. And the Chechen conflict was about winning over the Chechen population. And the Russians failed in this. And that's why the first Chechen conflict ended with a Russian defeat. The second Chechen conflict didn't. Vladimir Putin was prime minister and then president. Look, again, I'm getting ready to expose the fact that I'm Putin's puppet. But one of the coolest things about Vladimir Putin, from my perspective, was not that he told Boris Yeltsin, I'm not the man for the job, when Boris Yeltsin offered him the presidency. Putin went, no, not me. That's not me. I'm not ready for this. But Yeltsin brought him in anyway, said, that's why you have to be president, because you don't want it. I have a whole bunch of people over here who want to be president, but they want it for the wrong reasons. You don't want it for the right reasons, so you're going to be president. So Putin, Yeltsin resigned. Putin gave his own New Year's talk. It was videotaped in the morning. Then he and Yeltsin met. They signed some documents, and then he got on an airplane, flew to the front, got on a helicopter, and flew to the front lines in Chechnya and met with the troops. Day one as president, flew to the front lines and met with the troops and celebrated New Year's with the troops. That's leadership. That's leadership. That's real leadership. And I just don't think the West understands what kind of man Vladimir Putin is. But that tells me a lot about who he is, that he did that.
All right, let's take a live shot now at my Twitter page. There it is, live. And so far, 10,000 plus views so far, 108 retweets, 198 likes. So
You're
that's not bad.
trending.
Yeah, not bad, not bad. It's a good start. So everybody who wants to help us get Elon Musk's attention, please go to my Twitter page. It's the pinned tweet at Citizen Jeff. Retweet it, and hopefully we'll get his attention.
Let me just do a quick check here, Jeff.
Okay, I know what this is, but go ahead.
No, I'm still done, man. Okay,
All right.
sorry. Didn't
It's a
work yet.
process. It's a process. Comrade Phil from Groundhog's Republic of Pennsylvania. Speaking of states that have their own weird election laws and also election results, I think they elected a dead guy there. And they also elected a guy who had a stroke. Whatever. I'm sure Pennsylvania is a wonderful place. Do you think the U.S. may be forced out of Syria by the end of the year? And what do you think will happen to the Kurds?
Well, that question is set up by a major Russian diplomatic victory that occurred recently, where the Russians were able to get the Turks and the Syrians together, and the Turks agreed in principle that they would withdraw their forces from Syria as part of their respect for Syrian sovereignty. Now, a key aspect to that is a general agreement by Syria, Turkey, and Russia that the YPG, which is a Kurdish group in Syria, is recognized as a terrorist organization. This is a big deal. The YPG is pretty much a front for what's called the PKK, which is another Kurdish group operating out of Turkey. It's a Turkish Kurdish group that's been waging a war against the Turks now for decades, since the 1980s. And Turkey has long recognized them as a terrorist group. So has the United States, so has much of Europe. So the YPG is recognized, therefore, by extension, by association, as a terrorist group. When the United States went back into Iraq in 2014, when ISIS exploded and you had the big ISIS charge out of the Syrian desert into western Iraq up to Mosul, capturing Iraq's second largest city, and then pivoting down through Tikrit and coming to the outskirts of Baghdad, the United States intervened. The interesting thing is, so did Iran. Our best ally at the time was a guy named Qasem Soleimani. You might know that name because we assassinated him a couple of years later. But in 2014, 2015, he was our big ally. We were working with him to push the ISIS back. One of the key things that made our system work, because we were loath to have so-called boots on the ground. So we had a bunch of special forces there who were trained as they called JTACs, Joint Tactical Air Controllers. They can call in airstrikes. So we had a lot of airplanes, a couple special forces teams, but we couldn't get the special forces teams where they needed to be because we weren't allowed to be on the front line, hooking and jabbing with the enemy. We had to be back. So we set up relationships with Iraqi special forces, and we gave them these little like iPad type devices that we could communicate with them. And so they'd go in and show us a target, designate, and then we'd transfer that to the airplane, and we'd do this remote controlling and get the same result, blow things up, etc. The reason why I bring that up is once we retook Mosul and we started pushing ISIS into Syria, we had to cross into Syria. And we needed a new proxy force. We needed a force that we could give these little, iPad type devices to. Well, we couldn't give it to the Syrian army because they were against us. So we gave it to the Kurds, but the Kurds were at the time the YPG. And they're terrorists, and we can't, of course, cooperate with terrorists. So we met with them, and we said, just change your name. So they became the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. And we went, see, they're democratic. They're not terrorists. And then we worked with them, gave them the magic little things, and we retook Raqqa. We did a whole bunch of stuff. We cleared out ISIS, and then we occupied northern Syria in the process. One of the things we've done in northern Syria is we recognize that Syrian oil production that takes place in that area was being diverted by ISIS to generate income. They would sell it on the black market using Turkish truckers, sell it up to Turkey, and Turkey would, gladly absorb it because you get to buy a lot of oil at cheap prices, then resell it at expensive prices, and you make a profit. So we stopped letting ISIS do that, and we started doing that. But we now do it on behalf of the Kurds. How do the Kurds get an income? Because there's no viable economy there. They sell oil. So we're stealing oil from Syria, reselling it to either in northern Iraq to the Kurds that are there, or we sell it to Turkey, and that profit goes to the to the Kurds. And so there's a symbiotic relationship between the United States and the SDF, which is also the YPG. Big problem now, because now Turkey has gotten the Russians and the Syrians to call the YPG terrorists. This is going to put the United States in a big quandary because we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I think our position in Syria is untenable, politically speaking. There's really no military reason for us to be there. We're just there to put a thumb in the eye of Russia and Syria. But now that Turkey's withdrawing, it's going to be problematic. Is it going to happen this year? It could happen this year, but it's going to happen. Whether it's by the end of this year, early next year, I don't know, because there's a lot of stuff that could possibly happen. The Turks could take a lot longer to get out of Syria than I think. But remember this for the Turks. Why are they doing this? Because they have invested a lot in their position in Syria, a lot politically. And even, a while ago, Erdogan was talking about, I'm gonna have a major offensive there. I'm gonna double down. We're gonna expand the corridor to 50 kilometers and all this kind of stuff. But now he's talking about leaving. Why? Why would he do this? And the answer is because Vladimir Putin has said, we're going to make Turkey a regional energy hub. We're going to put in a second Turk Stream pipeline. We're going to double the amount of gas that's going to be made available. And we're going to support the Turks receiving gas from other areas so that it becomes the price setting standard. If they'll call it the Istanbul Index. And they're going to set the price, and they're going to, set the market for gas being provided to Southern Europe and to other regions. This is going to be a game changer for the Turkish economy, which was a sort of an anchor around Erdogan's neck. He has an election later this year. Election he could very well lose because of the state of the Turkish economy. He was trying to distract people by elevating the crisis in Syria, saying this is life and death existential struggle. But now he's de-emphasizing that, and he's I know, Gavin, I did that on purpose. And he's elevating the economic again because of the great potential of being an energy hub. So again, Russian diplomacy comes into play. When was the last time the United States had a diplomatic victory of this nature, something that promotes peace? When was the last time we convinced anybody to leave anywhere militarily? We don't do it. Russia has done it. Russia's doing it. And it's a big deal. But the bottom line is I don't know exactly when U.S. troops are going to leave Syria, but they're going to leave Syria.
All right, let's do one more of the prepared questions, meaning the ones submitted in advance before we get to some of the live ones. Tori, let's line up some good ones. You posted one earlier from Ricardo near the beginning of the podcast, but
I have that one. Yep.
You do have that one. Okay, great. Thanks. Angie V. from Amherstburg, Ontario. The mainstream media continues to deny there is a neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine. How well do you think the Russians are doing with the battle of eliminating the Banderists? The problem with trying to give the Russians a grade at this point in time is that
when you're trying to destroy somebody, most people, most groups don't sit around and go, kill me. When you try to kill them, they fight back. They push back. They dig in deeper. And so, the problem of the Banderists, this odious ideology, has actually expanded. From February till today, they're become stronger. They're more influential. They're digging in. So if we were to call a pause right now and stop, you'd have to give Russia, a failing grade, because there's more of these neo-Nazis today and they're more powerful. They're more deeply entrenched than they were in February when this operation started. But sometimes to exterminate something, you have to draw it out first, and that's what the Russians are doing. This is a process of drawing it out, etc. And I believe the Russians when they say that their objective of denazification will be fulfilled. And so one of the things about drawing them out is you're identifying them too. And so the Russians are learning more about this odious ideology, who's professing it, who's implementing it, who's acting on it, who's supporting it, etc. And it's going to make, when Russia does win, and they are going to win, it's going to make it an easier job for Russia to cleanse Ukraine of the Banderists.
Odious.
What you're going through with your cough is a metaphor for this process.
It is. I'm drawing out the Banderists. Yes.
Yeah. All right, let's get to it. From our angel in Quebec, the cool dude in a loose mood, my pal Richie, watching the weather forecast daily. Looks like deep frost on the line of contact is almost upon us. What is your experience with NATO weaponry's efficacy in cold weather? Will it give an advantage to the Russian side?
NATO designs very effective yet complicated equipment. They haven't designed a new tank or a new armored fighting vehicle in a while because they didn't need to. The Leopard tank is an old tank. The Martyr infantry fighting vehicle is an old one. They tried to build this new one. I think it was a Python or something like that. They built 18 of them. And they all broke. They don't work. But I will say this: during the Cold War, sort of an interesting phrase given what we're talking about, wintertime. We trained. I mean, it's the key is training. Yes, you can build this equipment if they're doing their job right. Every equipment's going to be put through a weather test and make sure they can operate in the rain, it can operate in the snow. It doesn't, because you want to know. You want to know what's going to happen when it's 32 below out there and you try to cold crank an engine. Is the engine block going to blow up on you? The fuel lines freeze up. What do you have to do to keep fuel lines going, hydraulic lines going, etc.? And you build these systems. And we used to do that. We used to design it that way. But it's one thing to have the equipment designed that way. You have to have the manpower that understands what it's done and then actively trains on it. And I will tell you right now, during the Cold War, we used to go out and train in the wintertime, freeze to death, literally, because you train as you're going to fight. For the last 20 years, NATO has been involved in, nation-building exercise in Afghanistan. Their military has been confined to barracks. They haven't been going out there in the wintertime and cranking up the engines and practicing, combat operations in an Arctic environment, in a frozen environment. So they're going to fail. Literally, they will fail in wintertime. They don't know how to fight. There are some select units. Look, the Norwegians live in the cold, and so they have some units that can do that. The Marine Corps has a brigade that we send up there, and we practice the wintertime. The Army has some, we have a 10th Mountain Division in the Fort Drum, New York, that's supposed to be a cold weather capable unit. So there are some units that do this, but by and large, no, we don't train for that. The Russians, on the other hand, do. They train for this. Their equipment is tested for this. Their equipment isn't as complicated. I will put a little, what's that word I like to use, Jeff? The asterisk.
Asterisk.
Asterisk. I'll put an asterisk there because there's some stuff. For instance, let's take the T-14 Armada. How does it perform in the cold? in combat-like conditions? I don't know. I don't know if it's been fully tested that way. Did the Russians make the same mistake that the West has been making? I don't know. This T90 MB3 that I'm touting has a whole bunch of cool stuff on it. Does it function in the cold? Is it maintainable in the cold? I don't know. See, what we see is that the Russians are actually coming out with more complex weapon systems. And the more complex a weapon system is, the greater the likelihood that it's going to fail when subjected to stresses like cold. So we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know right now, but we're going to find out. You know, as Ricardo said, the cold front's coming in. Temperature's about to drop. Ground's about to freeze. The Rasputitsa is over. General winter's kicking in, and we're going to find out which side is better prepared to fight in cold weather, our Russians or Ukrainians.
All right. The comment about fast times at Ridgemont High was in reference to something that came up on Tuesday's episode. Scott was trying to remember the name of that movie. We got a lot of response to that, and it's good to see people are focused on the important things. So. Let's move on to Merdad B, who is giving us 11 something or other. What's that currency? I have to figure out how much.
Euro.
Yeah, what's that in American currency roughly?
$10.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Merdad. Scott, can you talk a bit about Iran and the hypersonic missile they announced?
Well, let's say this about Iran. After the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians fired a dozen or so missiles at the Al-Assad air base where Americans were located. And these missiles hit everything they aimed at, precise. I mean, it's every American who looked at, every intelligence officer, every operations officer who looked at what was hit went, holy cow, these guys were dialed in. They launched a missile. It hit exactly where they wanted to hit. And these were older missiles. The Iranians have a very advanced ballistic missile research and development program. They have some of the finest mathematicians in the world. They go around and they win, math Olympics often. They're always competitive. They have their PhDs have the highest level of peer review in the Middle East. They're competitive with Europe. In the United States. So anybody who wants to denigrate the Iranians, they're just a bunch of ragheads, camel jockeys. Nah, they're actually very advanced society with very intelligent people with an industry that produces some really good weaponry. And so if the Iranians come out and say, that they developed a hypersonic missile, I have to believe that they did that. And it doesn't surprise me because they are fully capable of doing it. The curious thing is, if the Iranians actually filled a hypersonic missile, they'll have beaten the United States to the punch because we're still working on perfecting a hypersonic missile, and we haven't quite gotten there yet. So we'll see.
Nick, I've been watching for over 40 minutes and still no whipping sounds. What has changed in Jeff?
Don't yield to peer pressure, Jeff. Don't yield to peer pressure.
It's nothing. Nothing has changed. Nobody has committed a violation that requires discipline. That's the only answer. CBDX.com. Thank you for the $20. U.S. currency. Do you think if all the parties to this conflict took some of our legal THC gummies, he would relax and negotiate a settlement? Seems to work for everyone else. Now, you're asking a guy who's never even tried cannabis, or so he claims. So, I don't know.
Jeff, I know nothing about cannabis. I don't know what THC
No,
stands
seriously, why haven't you ever tried it?
Well, because I was involved in a line of work where you had to pee in a bottle, and if it got detected in the bottle, they sort of put you in jail.
I see.
That might be a good reason not to use it.
That's a great reason. It's not the best reason now, though, but it was a great reason.
No, but then the question now comes: okay, I've conditioned myself that way.
Right.
Why do I want to use THC? I mean, I've never wanted to use it. I know if somebody comes up to me today, look, I used to play basketball, and there's a guy who was in a lot of pain, and you could tell if he once New York legalized medical marijuana, this guy went to Massachusetts, got his marijuana, came here and smoked it, and smoked it, or I don't know, consumed a gummy or something like that. Right. He'd show up on the basketball court and he was moving like a kid. And I'm like, what the heck has happened to you? He goes, oh man, you got to do this. I just took a couple of these things. Man, I can move. I'm doing all that stuff. Now, that could possibly get me to do it, but I still have to cross.
Well, I have to warn you, there are different types of marijuana, and also different people have different reactions. But yes, that's the whole thing. Yeah,
I don't want to do it. I just don't have any desire to get high.
Okay. Well, I won't be a bad influence on you. If I'm sitting next to you sometime and somebody lights something, I'll offer it to you. I'll offer to you to be polite. I'll offer to you.
Just breathe in my face, Jeff. That's all I ask.
All right. Scott isn't qualified to answer the question, so we'll move on to the next one. This is, let me try to pronounce this. This is Paolo Cavalacciacci Willakanansi. And when the U.S. loses Europe and the Far and Middle East, what does the future hold for the U.S.?
Well, first of all, we have to understand the United States is a very powerful country with a very strong economy, with a very developed military, with relationships that are global in nature. So anybody who thinks that the U.S. is going to suddenly collapse and go away, you're wrong. When you say loses Europe, maybe we will diminish our influence with Europe, but we're not going to lose Europe. It's not as though Europeans will stop talking to us. It's just that Europe will probably start focusing more on Europe and less on the United States. The same thing with the Far and Middle East. There's still relationships there. They're going to be sustained over time. It took a long time for Rome to collapse, and it's going to take a long time for the United States to collapse. I think the future of the United States is going to be dictated by not the collapse of the United States, but the growth of the multipolarity, competition, BRICS. The United States trajectory in global geopolitics will be more dictated by BRICS, and how developed BRICS becomes, the relationships that BRICS develops, that will dictate a new economic reality the United States will have to adapt to. And then as we adapt, we will adjust. And I think the United States will eventually gravitate to the position that it should hold in the world, which is a very strong position, very influential position, but not the dominant position anymore.
I know one thing that will continue to fuel good international relations.
Right.
Speaking of Rome. All right, Tori, what else you have? Rowdy Everlap, thanks for the $2. That's enough for the kind of wine I used to buy before things got so lucrative. I'm now up to a $5 bottle of wine. Can't Russia just down all their tree lines?
I think burn down all their tree lines.
What did I say? Whatever, it doesn't matter.
You're right. Down. You skip the burn. Okay. I think what he's referring to is that when you go and you look at the terrain in Ukraine, there's a lot of roads that have tree lines put in, and the Ukrainians have built these defensive barriers. They've dug in these tree lines, so they're protected by foliage overhead. Then underneath, you have a whole bunch of tree lines, and it's sort of one of the cornerstones of the Ukrainian defense. And it's frustrating, I guess, for Russians because it's difficult to fight through that. And so the question is, why can't you just burn them down? First of all, it's I think Ukraine has a higher dew point than the American West or whatever, and that it's not as easy as one would think to light a fire. So you're not. It's not like you go in and throw a match and there goes the tree line and yay, we got them all. I think the bigger question is, why can't you for instance, use the TOS systems, the TOS system, TOS 1 and TOS 2, which are, the Russians call them flamethrower weapons. They're really thermobaric weapons, multiple launch rocket systems. They fire these warheads that basically suck the oxygen out of everything and kill things. And the Russians are using this. You see them use this. But, Ukraine's a big country. a lot of people don't realize that it's a big country, and you're talking about a front line of thousands of kilometers. You can't toss every single square meter. So yeah, you may be able to go in here and clear out 200 meters of trench line, but now try to advance on it. You're going to be hit by javelin missiles over here, javelin missiles over there. You bring in your helicopters, and there's going to be man pads all over the place shooting at you. It's an integrated defense system. So even though you clear out something here, getting to that point is going to expose your flanks. You got to clear everything out, and that's problematic. Can it be done? Yeah. At what price? Russia's not willing to, at this point in time, to expend the resources. And when I say expend the resources, I mean have men die, have equipment be lost to accomplish that. They're taking a more methodical pace. They're sitting there and they're pounding these lines. They're taking advantage of this positional warfare, because as you pound the lines with artillery and you kill the Ukrainians have to replace them. And when they replace them, you just put up fresh meat to be ground down again. And this is a casualty exchange ratio that Russia is willing to continue, because it's 100% decisively in their favor. So that's what they're doing. When the time comes, when these 10 to 15 division equivalents show up, Russia will knock a giant gap in the Ukrainian defenses, and they will penetrate. They will suffer losses doing so, but they will have the resources capable of absorbing those losses, pushing through, and achieving a decisive outcome on the battlefield.
All right, I'm not even going to try. Okay, let's move on to. Sorry, Damas, please elaborate on your position on Syria. 500,000 people have been killed, all in Israel's interest.
I mean, my position on Syria is very simple. The government of Syria is the government of Bashar al-Assad, and he alone gets to decide what happens to Syria. End of story. I'm against all uninvited foreign elements that are operating in Syria. I'm against the United States being in Syria. I was against NATO when the French and the British were in Syria. I'm against the Turks being in Syria. I'm against ISIS operating in Syria. I'm against the Al-Qaeda spinoffs, al-Nusra and others that are operating in Idlib. I think Syria belongs to Syrians, and this is a tragedy. 500,000 people have been killed. Why? They've been killed because certain elements decided they want Bashar al-Assad removed from power. Do I blame it all on Israel? No. I blame it on the United States. Israel didn't start this conflict. The United States did. Saudi Arabia did. Turkey did. Israel's a player now. They're involved. They're concerned about Iran's involvement, but Iran wouldn't have become involved the way they had the West not tried to overthrow Bashar al-Assad, and therefore creating the conditions where Iran had to intervene to preserve its strategic interests, because the fall of Syria would have been devastating for Iran geopolitically. So it was in Iran's interest to keep Bashar al-Assad going. I'll disagree with the one thing the guy said. It's the other legitimate force that's in Syria. It's not just the Russians who were invited in 2015. Prior to that, the Iranians were invited in, so they're there legitimately. And then there's a third element. Hezbollah has been invited in. So Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia have all been invited into Syria by the Syrian government. Therefore, you can't speak of the illegitimacy of their presence. It's not illegitimate. The only legitimate authority in Syria invited them in. Everybody else is there in violation of international law.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
Thugnificent. That's my old stage name, coincidentally.
Really?
Yeah, when I was a stripper, I used to go by that name, Thugnificent. What's going to happen with the oil markets coming year? I can't send Super Chat. I would if I could. That's all right. Just give us your address, Thug, and we'll come over and collect the money. No problem.
Will you wear a leather jacket?
Yes, exactly.
Because you're frightening when you do that.
The implied threat, of course.
What's going to happen with the oil markets? If I really could tell you that, I'd be a millionaire, because I'd play the oil markets and I'd predict everything. It's tough. You're first of all, we're talking about huge corporations that produce oil for a living, and it's designed to make money, but it's also designed to be sustainable, etc. They like predictability. This Ukraine conflict has thrown predictability, out, and one of the problems is the West has decided they want to unplug from Russian oil, and when you do that, Russia is one of the is I think the second largest producer of oil, maybe the first largest producer of oil in the world. They're up there. That has an impact on the market. The Russian, and one of the things people have been trying to do is to put a cap on Russia's ability to profit from this war, because of course, once you stop buying Russian oil, the price of oil goes up, and so Russia can actually make more money by selling less oil, and that frustrates people, because the whole idea of stopping to buy Russian oil to begin with was to bankrupt Russia, to deny them access. But Russia knows the market better than anybody else, and they've been able to sell oil cheaply, but cheaply in relation to the market price. But if the price keeps going up, the Russian discount will also keep going up in terms of how much money Russia makes, and Russia's making a lot of money. But the key thing here is that the price of oil keeps going up. People have been trying to get Saudi Arabia to increase oil production to offset the loss, but Saudi Arabia, I think, has seen the writing on the wall, and they don't want anybody, including the United States, to be able to put a price cap on Saudi Arabian oil down the road. Imagine if the United States tried to do that in the aftermath of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. If we said, "Oh, those dirty Saudis, we can't, but nobody can buy their oil, and we're going to cap it." Well, the Saudis are looking at saying, if you allow Russian oil to be capped, our oil will get capped too. So what we're going to do is double down on stupid, meaning on America's stupidity. And we're going to drop our oil production, putting more pressure on oil prices to go up. Russia makes more money. Saudi Arabia makes more money. And that seems to be the case. The United States, it's amazing. We just tried to go back to Venezuela, because we sanctioned Venezuela, shut their oil off. That worked fine when we were able to buy Mazur grade oil from the Urals in Russia, which replicated the physical properties of Venezuelan oil, which of course is optimized to American refineries in the Gulf of Mexico and Louisiana, Texas. They all are programmed to take this Venezuelan oil and turn it into gasoline and other products. When you deny the Venezuelan oil access to the American market, we brought in the Russian oil, but now we're stopping producing the Russian oil, which means we got to spend billions of dollars on redoing our refineries or start buying Venezuelan oil. And that's why we went crawling back on our knees to Venezuela, saying, please, please, please let Chevron continue to produce oil that can be used to feed our refineries. That's a lot of pressure on Venezuela. Their economy is in the dumps. And so it looks like they're going to at least play part of that game, but the amount of oil that's going to come in isn't sufficient. How do we know it's not sufficient? Because we're still buying the Russian oil. We don't buy it directly from Russia because, of course, we can't do that, but we buy it through the Indians. You see, the Russians are selling the oil to the Indians, and the Indians put it on a tanker, and it comes in, and we buy it off the Indian tanker, then we bring it in. It's Russian oil. So anybody who says America's not buying Russian oil, you don't know what you're talking about. We're buying a lot of Russian oil. So are the Europeans. The bottom line is the market will find a way to adapt. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the market right now in terms of supply, but as Europe, for instance, Europe's economy is going to slow down. And when the economies slow down, the demand for oil reduces. We saw this in the pandemic. The pandemic hit the globe and global economy hit a pause. And when you hit a pause, the demand for energy isn't there. And there was a period of time where we had overproduced. If you remember back, I think in 2021, there was a period of time where you had to pay people to take oil. It's not, there was too much oil. There was insufficient storage space. And so if you were storing oil, you actually had to pay people to take your oil. Oil was negative value for a brief period of time because we had overproduced. And so that's a situation that nobody in the oil business wants to get into. They need predictability. They don't mind minor fluctuations in price. That's expected. But what they don't want is, unpredicted events to occur. And so I think, the this is why you see a lot of hypocrisy in the West, where they claim they don't want to buy Russian oil, but they are buying Russian oil because they have to keep supply chains working. They have to keep demand and supply relatively synced up. So I don't think we're going to see major collapses in the oil market. I do think we're going to see some pressure for prices to go up. But again, if the European economy doesn't recover and the pressure goes down, I think you might see oil prices actually drop because there'll be too much oil on the market. And when there's too much of something, I learned this in college when I took economics. If you got too much, you have to sell it for little to get rid of it. If you got a little, you get to sell it for more because everybody wants it. I think I answered the question.
Yes, you did. You answered a lot of questions, and we've hit the 2-hour mark, which means it's time to let Scott go cough up all the toxins in his body. And now that I'm all tanked up on Italian wine, it's time to let me hit the streets and engage in my nightly ritual of starting brawls in bars. And Tori, I'm not sure what she's going to do, but I do know she is the co-host of Scenes from the Evolution, our other podcast with Kevin Michelizzi, also who's now officially one of our co-hosts. And our new day is Sundays at 1 o'clock Eastern time. You can find it on this YouTube channel or by just going to evolver.live, because we're all about the evolvers. And tomorrow night, Scott is speaking in his hometown of Del Mar, New York at the library. Go down and see him there. Let's see if we can, there it is. There's the info, 451 Delaware Avenue in Del Mar at 6:45. That's a very unusual start time. Not 6:50, not 6:32, but 6:45 p.m. And let's check the Twitter page one more time. This is a live shot of my Twitter feed. And can you guys see? Yeah, you can see my cursor there. This is something I'm a little confused by. Maybe somebody can explain. Down here, it says 12,000 views. You see that? But up in here in the video, it says 4,204 views. How can the word views have one meaning here and a different meaning there? I don't know. But anyway, thanks to Eva Bartlett for retweeting. And I'm encouraging everybody who wants to see Scott back on Twitter to go to my Twitter feed, which is at Citizen Jeff, and retweet what you see there until we get Elon Musk's attention.
And just to highlight the importance of this, we have a Substack, and I wrote an article for Substack today. And thank goodness there's Telegram. I have a great Telegram page and channel, and I have a fantastic, Jeff, you know this, that chat channel is just insane.
It's lively, baby.
Great conversation going on in there and everything, and so when I put that up there, but the audience is a big time foreign audience in Telegram. A lot of people whose English isn't their first language. So a lot of times the articles that I write aren't getting the attention that they would be. For instance, if I had my Twitter page up with 100,000 followers, and you could put that article up there in a primarily English-speaking environment, we'd get a lot more traction. And with Substack, traction means subscriptions. I mean, look, we've said up front, we're not going to charge. We're not going to force people. We're not going to put a paywall up there. That's not what we're about. But I think there's a lot of people out there that understand the realities of keeping something like this going does require people to actually support us by subscribing. And when you deny me access to 100,000 plus English-speaking, followers, if that's the term that they use, you're denying me the potential to earn an income. So there's a real. This isn't just about me.
That's the part that's irrefutable. People have all these feelings about Twitter, all these feelings about Elon Musk. Well, it doesn't matter. This is the reality. It's a center of influence, and it changes our lives.
Yeah, I mean, Maverick. I used to be able to buy him some really high quality beef jerky, but by denying me access to the Substack, Maverick gets the cheap little stuff, and he's not looking so good right now. I think Maverick's starving to death. Please help Maverick live. I'm joking. He's doing fine.
No, but in the meanwhile, Substack, as Scott said, people can subscribe for free if they want to, but there is also an option to choose a paid subscription. So that is a way to support us. And there is also an option to just donate some amount, whether or not you're subscribing, you can always just donate any amount at all. So go to scottritterextra.com. Of course, some folks also support us here on YouTube, and we appreciate that. It all adds up, and we're putting it back into the operation. So please keep doing that, and we'll keep doing our part to produce what we think is good content, and hopefully you agree as well. Thank you, Scott. Another great episode. Thank you, Tori, for great work backstage. And we'll see you Sunday on Scenes from the Evolution with Tori and Kevin, and back again with Scott on Tuesday. Go check out Scott in person tomorrow night in his hometown of Del Mar. Take care, everybody.